For decades, the name Boeing was synonymous with American ingenuity and unwavering safety. It was more than just a company, it was a national treasure, a symbol of progress that connected the world. The engineers who walked its factory floors were seen as pioneers, artists of aviation who built marvels of modern technology. They crafted iconic aircraft like the 707, which ushered in the jet age, and the magnificent 747, the queen of the skies. These planes were not just machines, they were testaments to a culture that placed engineering prowess and meticulous attention to detail above all else. Safety was not a department, it was the very foundation upon which every aircraft was designed and built. This reputation was earned over many years of hard work and dedication. Boeing's early leaders were often engineers themselves, men who understood the physics of flight and the immense responsibility of carrying millions of passengers safely. They fostered an environment where speaking up about potential problems was encouraged, not punished. The company's headquarters were in Seattle, Washington, deeply rooted in the Pacific Northwest's community of skilled machinists and aerospace experts. This proximity between the corporate offices and the factory floor created a powerful synergy. Executives could literally see and touch the products they were selling, maintaining a direct connection to the people and processes that made Boeing great. The company's philosophy was simple but profound: build the best, safest airplanes in the world, and profits would follow. This engineering-first mindset led to groundbreaking innovations. Boeing was known for its robust designs, often over-engineering its aircraft to ensure they could withstand conditions far beyond what they would ever encounter. Pilots trusted Boeing planes implicitly. Airlines bought them with confidence, knowing they were investing in reliability and a brand that passengers recognized and felt safe with. This deep well of trust was Boeing's most valuable asset, built one safe flight at a time over the course of nearly a century. This golden era defined Boeing's identity. It was a place where excellence was the standard and cutting corners was unthinkable. The engineers were empowered. They were given the resources and the time to get things right. The internal culture celebrated technical achievement and rewarded those who identified and solved complex problems. This legacy of safety and innovation created an icon, a company that commanded respect across the globe. It was this very legacy that made its subsequent fall from grace so shocking and so tragic for the entire aviation world. The story of what came next is a cautionary tale of how quickly a sterling reputation built over generations can be dismantled. The year 1997 marked a pivotal turning point in Boeing's history. It was the year Boeing acquired its longtime rival, McDonnell Douglas. On the surface, it looked like a victory, a consolidation that would create an undisputed American aerospace champion. Boeing, with its strong commercial aviation division, was merging with a company known for its military might, including the F-15 Eagle fighter jet. The deal was valued at $13 billion, and was hailed as a strategic move to strengthen American industry against its European competitor, Airbus. But this merger was not simply a combination of assets and product lines. It was a clash of two fundamentally different corporate cultures. McDonnell Douglas, based in St. Louis, was known for a very different approach to business. Its culture was famously aggressive and financially driven, shaped by years of competing for government defense contracts. Its leadership was dominated by executives with backgrounds in finance and management, not engineering. They were renowned for their focus on cost-cutting, shareholder value, and maximizing profits. This was a stark contrast to Boeing's engineering-centric world in Seattle. While Boeing engineers were dreaming up the next great airplane, McDonnell Douglas executives were focused on the bottom line. The saying inside the industry was that McDonnell Douglas bought Boeing with Boeing's own money. After the merger, a significant number of McDonnell Douglas executives moved into top leadership positions at the newly combined company. Harry Stonecipher, the former CEO of McDonnell Douglas, became Boeing's president and chief operating officer. He brought with him a relentless focus on financial metrics. The new leadership began to fundamentally reshape Boeing's priorities. The long-held belief that building the best planes would naturally lead to profits was turned on its head. The new mantra became that hitting financial targets was the primary goal, and the planes were simply the means to achieve that end. This shift sent ripples of unease through the ranks of Boeing's veteran engineers. The cultural transformation was swift and deliberate. In 2001, the company made a symbolic and powerful move. It relocated its corporate headquarters from Seattle to Chicago. This decision physically separated the top executives from the engineers and factory workers who designed and built the airplanes. The C-suite was now hundreds of miles away from the noise, the metal, and the daily challenges of aircraft production. This distance created a disconnect between the decision-makers and the product itself. The culture of McDonnell Douglas, with its emphasis on share price and cost control, had effectively staged a reverse takeover of Boeing's soul. The stage was set for a new era, one where financial calculations would begin to outweigh engineering judgment. With the new leadership firmly in place, Boeing's operational philosophy underwent a radical transformation. The focus shifted decisively from engineering excellence to financial performance. The language inside the company began to change. Instead of conversations centered on innovation and design integrity, meetings became dominated by discussions of stock price, earnings per share, and cost reduction initiatives. Executives who had once prided themselves on building the world's best airplanes were now judged by their ability to meet quarterly financial targets. This new approach created a pressure cooker environment where the short-term demands of Wall Street began to overshadow the long-term principles of safety and quality. The change was felt most acutely on the factory floor and in the engineering departments. Experienced engineers, who had once been empowered to make decisions based on safety and quality, now found their recommendations challenged or overruled for budgetary reasons. The company began to outsource more work to subcontractors, often choosing the lowest bidder to save money. This fragmented the design and manufacturing process, making it harder to maintain the rigorous quality control that had been a hallmark of the old Boeing. The deep institutional knowledge held by generations of Boeing employees started to erode as veteran engineers, disillusioned with the new direction, began to retire or leave the company. This finance-driven approach had a profound impact on how new projects were conceived and managed. Instead of starting with a clean sheet of paper to design the best possible aircraft for the future, the company began to favor modifying existing designs. Updating an old model was significantly cheaper and faster than developing a new one from scratch. This strategy minimized development costs and allowed Boeing to get a product to market quickly to compete with Airbus. It was a decision that made perfect sense on a spreadsheet. However, it forced engineers to add new technologies onto older airframes, creating complex systems that sometimes had unforeseen consequences. The focus was on incremental, cost-effective updates rather than bold, revolutionary leaps in aviation. The ultimate symbol of this new philosophy was the company's attitude toward its own workforce. The once cooperative relationship between management and the machinists' union grew increasingly contentious. Contract negotiations became bitter battles over pensions, health benefits, and job security. The company viewed its highly skilled workforce not as its greatest asset, but as a significant cost to be managed and minimized. This adversarial relationship damaged morale and created an atmosphere of distrust. The deep sense of shared purpose that had once united everyone at Boeing, from the CEO to the mechanic on the line, was replaced by a culture of division and anxiety, where the numbers mattered more than the people. The development of the Boeing 737 MAX was born out of intense competitive pressure. In 2010, Airbus, Boeing's European rival, announced the A320neo, an updated version of its popular single-aisle jet. The neo stood for New Engine Option, and it promised airlines significant improvements in fuel efficiency. The A320neo was an immediate success, and orders began pouring in from airlines around the world. One of Boeing's most important customers, American Airlines, signaled that it was ready to place a massive order with Airbus. This created a sense of panic within Boeing's Chicago headquarters. Losing such a key customer would be a devastating blow. Faced with this threat, Boeing had two choices. It could invest the time and money, likely a decade and billions of dollars, to design an entirely new single-aisle airplane from the ground up. This was the path the engineers would have preferred, as it would have allowed them to create a truly modern, state-of-the-art aircraft. The second option was much faster and cheaper: update the existing 737, an airframe that had been designed in the 1960s. The leadership, driven by its finance-first mentality, chose the second path. They decided to put new, larger, more fuel-efficient engines on the old 737 airframe and call it the 737 MAX. This decision would get a competing product to market in just a few years. This presented a major engineering challenge. The new engines were much larger than the old ones and didn't fit properly under the 737's low-slung wings. To solve this, Boeing's engineers had to mount the engines further forward and higher up on the wings. This change altered the plane's aerodynamics. Specifically, it created a tendency for the plane's nose to pitch up under certain flight conditions, increasing the risk of an aerodynamic stall. A stall is a dangerous situation where the wings lose lift and the plane can fall out of the sky. The engineers needed to find a way to counteract this new tendency without having to undertake a costly redesign of the entire aircraft. The solution was software. Engineers created a system called the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, or MCAS. This automated system was designed to automatically push the airplane's nose down if it sensed the plane was pitching up at a dangerous angle. Crucially, Boeing made the decision to downplay the existence of MCAS. The company wanted the 737 MAX to feel and fly exactly like the previous versions of the 737. This would mean that airlines wouldn't have to invest in expensive new pilot training on simulators. Keeping training costs down was a key selling point for the MAX. As a result, MCAS was not mentioned in the pilot flight manuals, and most pilots had no idea it even existed on their planes. The Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, or MCAS, was designed to work quietly in the background, completely invisible to the pilots. Its main purpose was to make the 737 MAX handle just like its earlier versions, so airlines could avoid expensive and time-consuming simulator training for pilots already certified on the 737. The system was set to activate automatically, without any input from the flight crew. It relied on a single sensor, known as an angle of attack, or AOA sensor, which measures the angle between the wings and the oncoming air. If this one sensor indicated that the plane's nose was too high, MCAS would automatically push the nose down to prevent a potential stall. But, there was a critical and ultimately fatal flaw in this design: its reliance on a single point of failure. The entire system depended on the data from just one of the two AOA sensors on the plane. If that one sensor malfunctioned and sent an incorrect reading to the flight computer, MCAS would believe the plane was in danger of stalling, even if it was flying perfectly straight and level. In such a situation, the system would repeatedly and forcefully push the plane's nose downward. The pilots would find themselves fighting their own aircraft, with no clear indication of what was causing these uncommanded nose-down movements. It was, in effect, a hidden trap embedded in the plane's software. To make matters worse, MCAS was given a lot of power. Early versions of the system made small, subtle adjustments. However, during flight testing, engineers realized the system needed more authority to be effective at low speeds. So they increased its power, allowing it to move the horizontal stabilizer, the large wing on the tail, by a much greater amount. This change wasn't properly documented or communicated through the company's own safety assessment processes. That meant a malfunctioning MCAS could not just nudge the nose down, it could push it down so forcefully that it would be almost impossible for the pilots to counteract manually by pulling back on the controls. The most critical failure, though, was the lack of transparency with pilots and regulators. Because Boeing was focused on making sure the MAX required no new simulator training, the company successfully lobbied the Federal Aviation Administration to keep any mention of MCAS out of the pilot manuals and training materials. So the pilots who stepped into the cockpit of the brand new 737 MAX had no idea that this powerful automated system was operating in the background. They weren't trained on how it worked, what could cause it to malfunction, or how to disable it if it activated by mistake. They were, in the words of one investigator, flying blind, completely unaware of the hidden system that could, under the wrong circumstances, seize control of their airplane. On October 29, 2018, the hidden flaw in the 737 MAX revealed itself in the most horrifying way. Lion Air Flight 610 took off from Jakarta, Indonesia on a routine morning flight. The plane was brand new, having been in service for only a few months. Almost immediately after takeoff, a faulty angle of attack sensor began feeding incorrect data to the flight computer. This triggered MCAS. The system, believing the plane was about to stall, began to push the nose down. The pilots were confused. They fought against the plane's controls, pulling the nose back up, only to have MCAS push it down again. This terrifying struggle continued for several minutes. The pilots of Lion Air Flight 610 did not know about MCAS. They had no idea why their brand new airplane was trying to dive into the sea. They battled the automated system more than 20 times, locked in a desperate tug-of-war for control of the aircraft. But they were fighting an invisible enemy. The relentless, powerful movements commanded by MCAS eventually overwhelmed them. Just 13 minutes after taking off, the Boeing 737 MAX plunged into the Java Sea. All 189 people on board, passengers and crew, were killed. In the immediate aftermath, there was confusion. Boeing initially suggested that pilot error or maintenance issues at the airline might be to blame, deflecting attention from the plane's design. Just 5 months later, the world watched in horror as the tragedy repeated itself. On March 10, 2019, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 took off from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. It was also a nearly new Boeing 737 MAX. Once again, shortly after takeoff, a faulty AOA sensor triggered MCAS. The pilots found themselves in the exact same nightmare scenario as the Lion Air crew. The cockpit voice recorder captured their confusion and struggle as the plane's automated system repeatedly forced the nose down. These pilots had heard about the Lion Air crash and had some awareness of a potential issue, but the force of MCAS was still too powerful to overcome. Despite their efforts to follow emergency procedures, the pilots of Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 lost their battle. 6 minutes after takeoff, the plane crashed into a field, leaving a deep crater and no survivors. Another 157 people from 35 different countries lost their lives. 2 brand new airplanes of the same model had crashed in identical circumstances within 5 months. It was an undeniable pattern. The crashes of Lion Air 610 and Ethiopian Airlines 302 claimed a total of 346 lives. The world's aviation authorities could no longer ignore the evidence. The tragic loss of these lives exposed a catastrophic failure not just in a piece of software, but in the culture of the company that created it. Following the crash of Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302, the global aviation community responded with unprecedented speed. China became the first country to ground the Boeing 737 MAX, citing the need to ensure the safety of its flying public. Within hours, aviation authorities across Europe, Asia, and the rest of the world followed suit. The United States Federal Aviation Administration, or FAA, initially resisted, stating it had no data to warrant such an action. However, as the pressure mounted and new evidence from the crash site emerged, the FAA was forced to reverse its position. Within days, the entire global fleet of nearly 400 Boeing 737 MAX jets was grounded, an embarrassing and costly blow to Boeing and the American regulator. The grounding triggered intense investigations by governments and journalists around the world. As investigators dug deeper, a disturbing picture began to emerge. Internal Boeing documents and emails later released during congressional hearings revealed that the company knew about the risks associated with MCAS long before the crashes. One employee wrote in a message from 2016, "This airplane is designed by clowns who in turn are supervised by monkeys." Another conversation between 2 Boeing test pilots revealed one of them had experienced MCAS running uncontrolled in a simulator. These communications showed a culture where employees were aware of serious problems, but were either unable or unwilling to stop the production process. The spotlight also turned on the FAA and its certification process. Investigations revealed that the FAA had delegated much of the safety certification for the 737 MAX back to Boeing itself. This policy of self-regulation was designed to save the government money and speed up approvals. However, in the case of the MAX, it meant that Boeing was essentially grading its own homework. The agency's managers had pushed for a quick approval and had overlooked critical details about the changes to MCAS. The close relationship between the regulator and the regulated company was heavily criticized, raising questions about whether the FAA was still capable of acting as an independent and effective watchdog for public safety. For Boeing, the fallout was catastrophic. The company's then CEO, Dennis Muilenburg, was called to testify before the United States Congress, where he faced blistering questions from lawmakers and emotional confrontations with the families of the crash victims. He was forced to publicly admit that the company had made mistakes. The grounding of the MAX fleet lasted for 20 months, costing Boeing billions of dollars in lost sales, compensation to airlines, and production halts. But the financial cost paled in comparison to the damage done to its reputation. The trust that had taken a century to build had been shattered in a matter of months. The name Boeing was no longer a symbol of safety but of corporate greed and tragic failure. Even after the 737 MAX was cleared to fly again in late 2020, Boeing's troubles were far from over. The intense scrutiny brought on by the two crashes exposed a much deeper and more systemic problem with quality control across the company. It became clear that the issues were not isolated to a single aircraft model. Production problems began to plague other key programs, including the 787 Dreamliner, a technologically advanced wide-body jet. Manufacturing defects such as improperly joined sections of the fuselage were discovered, forcing Boeing to halt deliveries of the Dreamliner for extended periods to inspect and repair hundreds of parked aircraft. The company's woes continued to mount. Whistleblowers came forward with new allegations of shoddy production practices and a culture that prioritized pushing planes out the door over ensuring they were built correctly. One former quality manager at the 787 plant in South Carolina described a factory floor where tools were regularly left inside airplanes and workers were pressured to ignore manufacturing flaws. These reports painted a picture of a company whose long-standing commitment to quality had been sacrificed in the pursuit of faster production schedules and lower costs. Each new revelation further eroded the confidence of airlines and the flying public. The string of quality lapses reached another dramatic peak in early 2024. An Alaska Airlines 737 MAX suffered a terrifying incident when a door plug, a panel used to seal an unused emergency exit, blew out of the fuselage shortly after takeoff, leaving a gaping hole in the side of the plane. Miraculously, no one was seriously injured. The incident triggered another partial grounding of the MAX fleet and renewed investigations by the FAA. Investigators found that the bolts meant to secure the door plug had apparently been missing when the plane left the Boeing factory. This was not a design flaw like MCAS, it was a basic manufacturing error, a sign that the company's fundamental production processes were broken. The cumulative effect of these crises has been devastating for Boeing's business. The company has faced production slowdowns mandated by regulators, a mountain of financial losses, and a growing list of order cancellations from frustrated airlines. Its main rival, Airbus, has pulled far ahead in the race for market share. Strikes and contentious labor negotiations have further disrupted operations, signaling deep dissatisfaction within the workforce. The cascade of crises, from the 737 MAX to the 787 Dreamliner to the Alaska Airlines incident, demonstrates that the cultural problems that began with the McDonnell Douglas merger have created a state of permanent turmoil, undermining the very foundations of the once great American icon. The tragic story of Boeing's fall offers a powerful and sobering lesson for leaders in every industry. It demonstrates what can happen when a company loses its way, when the relentless pursuit of financial metrics is allowed to eclipse its core purpose and values. For nearly a century, Boeing's purpose was clear: to build the best and safest airplanes in the world. This mission guided every decision and united every employee. But the cultural shift that prioritized shareholder value above all else created a new purpose: to make money. The airplanes became secondary, a means to an end, and this change in focus had deadly consequences. The core of the problem was a leadership failure. The executives in Chicago, disconnected from the engineering and manufacturing realities in Seattle, created a system that rewarded speed and cost-cutting over safety and quality. They pressured their teams to meet impossible deadlines and unrealistic budget targets. This top-down pressure forced engineers and managers to make a series of small, seemingly reasonable compromises that, when added together, created a catastrophic risk. The decision to update an old airframe, the creation of MCAS, the reliance on a single sensor, and the concealment of the system from pilots were all choices driven by financial considerations, not by sound engineering principles. Boeing's story also highlights the critical importance of a healthy corporate culture, one that encourages open communication and empowers employees to speak up about problems without fear of retaliation. In the old Boeing, engineers were celebrated for finding flaws. In the new Boeing, raising concerns could be seen as an obstacle to meeting production goals. The internal emails and whistleblower reports reveal an environment where many employees knew things were wrong but felt powerless to stop the momentum of a flawed project. A culture of fear and silence is a breeding ground for disaster, as it allows problems to fester until it is too late. Ultimately, Boeing's failures teach us that there are no shortcuts to excellence. integrity, people, and product must always come before profit. A company's greatest asset is not its stock price, but the trust of its customers and the dedication of its employees. When a business loses sight of its fundamental responsibility, in Boeing's case, the sacred duty to ensure the safety of the millions of people who fly on its planes, it loses more than just money. It loses its identity, its reputation, and its soul. The lesson from Boeing is a stark reminder that how a company does business is just as important as the business it does. As we reflect on the story of Boeing's decline, we must first and foremost remember the 346 people who lost their lives aboard Lion Air Flight 610 and Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302. They were parents, children, business travelers, humanitarians, and tourists. They boarded those flights with trust, believing in the safety of the aircraft that carried them. Their tragic and preventable deaths must serve as a permanent reminder of the human cost of corporate negligence. Their memory demands more than just apologies and financial settlements. It demands real, lasting change to ensure that such a tragedy never happens again. The path forward for Boeing is long and difficult. The company must embark on a fundamental cultural reset. This cannot be a superficial public relations campaign. It must be a deep structural transformation that returns engineering and safety to the center of the company's identity. Leadership must be held accountable, and a new generation of leaders who prioritize product integrity over quarterly earnings must be empowered. The company needs to rebuild its relationship with its own workforce, fostering an environment where every single employee feels responsible for safety and is encouraged to raise their hand when something is not right. The physical and cultural distance between the executive suite and the factory floor must be closed. For the aviation industry as a whole, the Boeing saga is a wake-up call. Regulators like the FAA must reclaim their role as vigilant and independent overseers of public safety, not as partners to the companies they are supposed to regulate. The practice of delegating critical safety certifications must be re-examined and reformed. Airlines too have a role to play by demanding the highest standards of quality and transparency from manufacturers. The entire ecosystem of aviation depends on a shared commitment to safety as the #1 priority, a principle that is absolute and non-negotiable. It is a chain of trust, and every link must be strong. In the end, the story of how Boeing lost its wings is a cautionary tale for the modern age. It shows that even the most respected and powerful companies are vulnerable when they lose their moral compass. The pursuit of profit is a necessary part of business, but it can never be the only part. Safety, integrity, and a commitment to the people you serve must always come first. Honoring the lives lost means learning this lesson and embedding it into the heart of every decision, every design, and every airplane that takes to the sky. The price of safety is constant vigilance, and it is a price we must always be willing to pay.
In memory of the 346 lives lost, this story is dedicated to the passengers and crew of Lion Air Flight 610, October 29, 2018, and Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302, March 10, 2019. May their loss remind us that safety, truth, and accountability must never be compromised. God bless their souls. Thank you for watching Facts, Intrigue, Story History. FISH. Fish. Subscribe, like, and comment. Keep fishing with us.